We continue with chapter 7. Let's begin by considering their perceptions of what they have to complain about, and then go on to the technique. John's perception. John's complaint is that Elaine considers the time she spends working as a physician far more important than the time he spends working as an executive. He wants her to change this attitude. From his point of view, she has a large supply of time in her inventory, as he has in his. There are 24 hours in her day, just as there are 24 hours in his, and she is as free as he is to decide how she spends that inventory. Nobody is making her work at gunpoint. As he sees it, her only possible reason for insisting that he give up time at work to go to their child's play is because she views his work as so trivial that interruptions don't matter. Elaine's perception. Elaine's complaint is that John believes she has power over her schedule, when in fact she has none. He doesn't appear to understand the urgency and critical importance of work that involves human beings rather than products. She knows he is too intelligent and too decent to consider a dying patient and a dying product one and the same. She doesn't want to believe that he could be cruel for no reason, and so she falls back on a comforting platitude that ordinary people cannot possibly understand the problems of doctors. People need to complain, and not only in their personal lives. If you are in a dominant position in your work, you will often find yourself obliged to tell other people that you want something about them or about their behavior changed. If you're not in a dominant position, you will find yourself obliged to pass on similar messages on behalf of your superiors, telling other people that the superior is not satisfied with them as they are and wants something changed. There is an automatic negative reaction to complaints based on the fact that they are complaints, independent of whether they are accurate or logical or justified. The result of this automatic resistance is that most complaints are not listened to. They are heard, but they are not listened to. What we need is a way to structure complaints that will provoke less of this knee-jerk negativism. There is an effective one, based on the work of Thomas Gordon, called the 3-part message technique. Let's take a look at it with a view to incorporating it into the revision of Scenario 10. Using the 3-part message. Suppose you feel that your chief administrator, who likes to yell at staff members in public, is too domineering and unwilling to consider the feelings of others. Suppose you feel that someone has to tell him about this before he alienates valuable people and drives them away for good. Typical formulations of such a complaint include: Jim, you've got to stop being so domineering. You've got to start considering other people's feelings, which is leveling. Jim, I'm sick and tired of you acting like some kind of imperial potentate with no consideration at all for the feelings of other people. Blaming. People who insist on being domineering and who ignore the feelings of others are certain to regret it sooner or later. Computing. And the final one, Jim, we all know that you don't really mean to act like some kind of imperial potentate. Shoot. We know you consider other people's feelings. We realize that the way you act is just your manner. But we can't help wondering, is there any way we could get you to just moderate your behavior a little bit? Placating. All of these complaints will provoke hostility in the person they are directed at. Some are worse than others. All of them suffer from the same 3 critical flaws. They don't tell the administrator what element of his behavior should be changed. They don't tell him what effect that behavior has on the complainer. And they don't tell him why the objection is being made. In addition, they are vague, judgmental, and confrontational. And every one of them is an invitation to a fight. Gordon's three-part messages are very different. They are constructed to fit this pattern. I'm going to bring this on there. Let me show you the pattern. When you X, I feel Y because Z. Each of the variables X, Y, and Z must be filled with something that is directly observable and verifiable in the real world. For example, when you yell at the secretaries, I feel angry because they start crying and they can't type while they cry. Part 1. When you yell at the secretaries is something the person has actually done and will remember, and its reality is presupposed by the word when. Never begin your complaint with the word if, unless there is no possible way to avoid it, because if presupposes that something does not exist or has not happened. Use when instead. It's the most neutral of the words that could fill this spot. Part 2. I feel angry is directly observable and verifiable in the real world because of the speaker's body language. Part 3. Because they start crying and they can't type while they cry is also concrete, directly observable, and verifiable in the real world. The secretaries can be seen crying, and their performance can be seen to be impaired by their crying. This complaint message tells the administrator exactly what he does that is being objected to, exactly what reaction it produces in the complainer, and exactly what real-world phenomenon the complainer considers to be justified for making the complaint. There is no moralizing, and there are no vague, undefined terms to quarrel over. Certainly, yelling at the secretaries to such a degree that it reduces them to tears is acting like some kind of imperial potentate. Potentate, and should be stopped. Excuse me. But this is a much more efficient way to transmit that message. It's important not to tinker with the pattern of the three-part message, because the possibilities for ruining it are so varied and so unlikely to occur to you in situations of stress and tension. Be sure that the first part, when you X, refers to something real. It must not be when you act like ... or when you treat people like ... or when you do the awful things you do ... or when I have to put up with your ... None of these are verifiable. Be sure that the second part, I feel why, is filled in with an emotion. Don't use I feel like a second-class citizen or I feel like quitting. Be sure it begins with I feel and not with you make me feel like something or other. Even you make me angry is a mistake for 2 reasons. It is a separate complaint and should not be cluttering up the major one. And B, it says, you have the power to decide what emotion I will feel. Now this may be true, but it's a bad strategy to admit it. The only time that sequence should appear in a 3-part message is when it's the first part of the message that is genuinely necessary. For example, when you make me angry, I feel panicky because I hit people I am angry with. Be sure the third part, because Z, like the first, refers to something concrete in the real world. It must not be because nobody should have to put up with that, or because it's unfair and unreasonable, or because that's a terrible way to act, or because if this goes on, I won't be able to stand it. These messages will be tricky to put together at first. When you have to make a complaint without any lead time, you may have difficulty constructing one. You should therefore write them down or save them into a tape recorder and listen to the result. Whenever you do have time to plan ahead, you are more likely to get them right if you do that. It gives you an opportunity to practice the pattern at leisure, so that when you must use it off the cuff, it will come to you more easily, and you will find out if the complaint is one you really want to make. Here's an important rule to remember. If you can't fill in all 3 parts of a 3-part complaint message, you're not ready to complain yet. When you don't know what you want the other person to do, or how it makes you feel when they do it, or what effect their behavior has that justifies the request, it's not reasonable to expect them to know. When you know what it is you want them to stop doing or to do differently, and you know what emotion you feel when they do it, as they do it now, but you haven't the faintest idea what comes after the word because, the most typical problem, you aren't ready yet to make your complaint. For example, when you forget my birthday, I feel sad because ... Because what? Not because that means you don't care anything about me. Not because it shows you have no manners. Those statements are not verifiable in the real world. If what comes after because turns out to be something you'd be ashamed to say, far better to find that out before you say it. It's very common to discover while working out the 3 parts of the message that it isn't worth complaining about after all, and you may find yourself amazed that you can have been so upset about whatever it is. It's easy to feel resentful about something trivial and to let that resentment fester. And then to lose track of what it was you were really angry about. Constructing a 3-part message before you complain will refresh your memory and save you needless embarrassment. Warning. For any 3-part message, no matter how carefully you word it, remember to say it in leveler mode with neutral intonation. Try reading this sentence aloud as marked. When you yell at the secretaries, I feel angry because they start crying and they can't type while they're crying. Hear that abusive melody? It makes no difference what words you set to that tune. If you stress them that way, they become a verbal attack. 3-part messages are also extremely useful when someone is angry or distressed and you don't know why. If the individual will cooperate with you, explain the 3-part message pattern to him or to her and ask that one be provided as clarification. If you can't get that sort of cooperation, try constructing the message yourself and then saying to the person, I've been trying to decide why